$200,000, stacked, banded, hidden under the mattress of roommate 14 in a five-star Manhattan hotel. And the woman who found it, a black hotel maid named Loretta Jean Caldwell, overnight housekeeping supervisor, $17 an hour, eating granola bars for dinner in a supply closet. She unzipped the bag, counted every stack with her eyes, zipped it closed, and put it back. Listen, K-fam, she put it back. She didn't take one bill. Not one. Her mama needed $3,200 for physical therapy that insurance wouldn't cover, and this woman was looking at $200,000 in untraceable cash, and she put it back like it was someone else's laundry. But here's what she didn't know. Omo. She didn't know that the man who owned that money, Seok Jin Han, known in the Korean underworld as Ash, underboss of the Han crime family, with a serpent tattoo coiling up his neck, was standing behind a concealed door 3 feet away, watching her hands, watching her choose honesty over $250,000. And what he did after that, what it cost her, what it cost him. K-fam, I have never told a story like this one. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The cart had a broken wheel, left rear. It pulled to the right every 3 steps, and Loretta compensated without thinking about it anymore, the way a person favors a bad knee until the limp becomes invisible to everyone, including themselves. She pushed it down the 8th floor corridor of the Langham at 2:14 a.m., past doors that cost more per night than she made in a week, and the only sound was the faint rattle of miniature shampoo bottles shifting inside the supply caddy. Room 802. She knocked twice, waited, knocked again, slid the keycard. The suite was empty, bed untouched, but someone had left a half-eaten room service steak on the desk with a lipstick-stained wine glass beside it. $46 filet mignon. Loretta wrapped the plate, wiped the desk, stripped the napkin, checked the bathroom. Hair in the drain. She pulled it out with gloved fingers, dropped it in the trash bag, and kept moving. Listen, K-fam, this is how she spent every single night. Every single night. Pulling strangers' hair out of drains at 2 in the morning, cleaning up messes left by people who never once looked her in the eye. And this woman? She never complained, not once. Stay with me, because you need to understand who Loretta Jean Caldwell was before the money, before all of it. She had been at the Langham for 4 years and 7 months. Overnight housekeeping supervisor, a title that sounded like authority and paid like an afterthought. $17 an hour. No overtime approval unless Derek Sullivan personally signed the sheet, and Derek Sullivan personally signed nothing that didn't benefit Derek Sullivan. She ran a crew of 3 on the graveyard shift. Herself, a Guatemalan grandmother named Rosa, who spoke 4 words of English and cleaned faster than anyone Loretta had ever seen, and a revolving door of temps who lasted 2 weeks before the hours ate them alive. She pushed the cart past room 806, past room 808, past room 810. The hallway smelled like carpet cleaner and money, that specific Langham scent, the diffused bergamot and white tea that cost the hotel $14,000 a year and was designed to make guests feel like they belonged in a place most humans couldn't afford to visit. Loretta didn't smell it anymore. She smelled bleach and industrial detergent and the faint sweetness of fabric softener on fresh sheets, because those were her smells. The ones that lived in her uniform and her hair and the canvas tote bag she carried everywhere with the broken zipper she kept meaning to fix. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't stop walking. She pulled it out with one hand, cart handle in the other, and read the text from her mother. Baby, they saying PT twice a week now, not once. Insurance said no. Doctor said $3,200 for the full program. I told them I'd figure it out. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. 4 words that meant the opposite. Loretta did the math while she walked. Rent, $1,450. Groceries, $280. Loan payment. Utilities, $312.40. MetroCard, $33. The $600 she already sent home. That left her $185 for the month, for everything else. Everything else being toothpaste, laundry detergent, cat food for Biscuit, and the copay on her own dental cleaning she'd been postponing since November. $3,200 didn't exist in her life. It wasn't a stretch. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a number from a different planet. She put the phone back in her pocket. She kept pushing the cart. At 2:31 a.m., Derek Sullivan appeared at the end of the corridor. He materialized the way he always did. Suddenly, silently, like a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of showing up when you least wanted him to. Gray 3-piece suit, burgundy tie, reading glasses dangling on the chain around his neck. The class ring from Boston College catching the hallway sconces. Sweetheart, he didn't slow down. He never slowed down. He walked past her and her cart the way a man walks past a vending machine. Registered, categorized, dismissed. 8:12 still showing on the board. Let's speed it up. I finished 8:12 15 minutes ago, Mr. Sullivan. It's logged. He was already past her. Good girl, good girl, Loretta's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. She never responded. 4 years and 7 months. And she had never once corrected him, never once said, "My name is Loretta." Never once told him that she had been a supervisor at this hotel longer than 3 of his assistant managers combined. She didn't correct him because correction required hope. Hope that the correction would matter. Hope that the person hearing it was capable of receiving it, and Loretta had spent that hope on other things. Like rent, like her mother's hip. Rosa appeared from room 810, pushing her own cart. She caught Loretta's eye and made a small, precise gesture with her hand. The universal sign for that man is garbage. Loretta almost laughed. Rosa smiled, showing the gold cap on her left incisor, and disappeared back into the room. At 2:40 a.m., she parked the cart in the supply closet on the 8th floor. The closet was the size of a bathroom and smelled like pine sol and old mop water. She sat on an upturned bucket, the one she'd been sitting on for 4 years because the break room was on the 3rd floor and the elevator took 7 minutes round trip and she couldn't afford 7 minutes, and ate a granola bar. Nature Valley, oats, and honey. It was dinner. She'd had a banana at 10 p.m. before her shift, and this was the only other food she'd eat until 8 a.m., when she'd microwave a bowl of oatmeal in her apartment before pulling the blackout curtains closed and sleeping until 5 p.m. She chewed slowly. She looked at the wall. There was a stain on the wall that looked like the state of Georgia, and she'd been staring at it for years, and sometimes she talked to it, and sometimes it talked back. And that was the kind of thing that happened when you spent 5 nights a week alone in a closet at 3 a.m. in a building full of sleeping strangers. Girl, I do nails for women who stay in hotels like this. I've been in these supply closets. I've sat on these buckets. And let me tell you something about a woman who eats dinner on an upturned bucket in a closet and doesn't feel sorry for herself. That woman is either the strongest person in the building or the most broken, and usually she's both. Loretta finished the granola bar. She folded the wrapper into a small square. She always folded her trash, a habit from her mother's house in Savannah, where waste was a moral failing, and dropped it in the bin. She stood up. She pushed the cart back into the hallway. Room 812, knocked, waited, cleaned. A guest had hung a wet towel over the thermostat, and the room was 92 degrees. Loretta fixed it, changed the towel, opened the vent, wiped everything down. 15 minutes. She logged it on her clipboard. Room 814 was next. Room 814 had been booked year-round under a corporate name, Pinnacle East Holdings, LLC. Loretta had cleaned it maybe 200 times. The guest, or whoever used it, was never there during her shift. The suite was always in moderate disorder. Bed slept in but not thrashed, a whiskey glass on the nightstand. The bathroom used but not destroyed. Someone stayed occasionally, always briefly, always neatly. She never questioned it. Hotels in Manhattan had permanent bookings. Corporate accounts, visiting executives, rich men keeping apartments they didn't want their wives to know about. It was none of her business. Her business was the room. She knocked twice, waited, knocked again. Silence. She slid the key card. The green light blinked. She pushed the door open with her hip, cart first, and entered. The room smelled like vetiver. Not the hotel diffuser, something personal, a cologne or aftershave that had been in the air recently. Within the last few hours. She noted it the way she noted everything, automatically, without attaching meaning. The bed was unmade, one pillow displaced. The bathroom door was closed, but the light was off. She started with the bed. Loretta had a system. She'd developed it her first year and refined it every month since. Fitted sheet first. She pulled the duvet off in one motion, folded it over the foot of the bed, stripped the flat sheet, bundled the pillowcases. Then she lifted the mattress corner to tuck the fresh-fitted sheet. She liked hospital corners tight enough to bounce a coin off, and that's when her fingers touched something that wasn't mattress. The texture was wrong, nylon, a strap. She lifted the mattress higher. A black duffel bag, compact, maybe 18 inches long, wedged into the gap between the mattress and the box spring. It hadn't been there 2 nights ago when she last cleaned 8 and 14. She knew because she lifted this mattress every time, and her hands knew the topography of this bed the way a pianist knows a keyboard. She looked at the door, closed. She looked at the hallway through the gap under the door. No shadows, no footsteps. She pulled the bag out 6 inches. The zipper was halfway open. She opened it 3 more inches. Just enough. Stacks, banded stacks of $100 bills. Each band printed with $10,000. She counted the stacks with her eyes, not her hands. 20. 20 stacks of $10,000. $200,000. Ayo! Loretta didn't breathe for 4 seconds. Her hands were on the edge of the mattress. Her knees were against the bed frame. $200,000 was looking up at her from inside a nylon bag, and the room was so quiet she could hear the HVAC system cycling and the blood in her own ears. K-fam, stop. I need you to understand this moment. This woman makes $17 an hour. Her mama needs $3,200 for therapy. She's eating granola bars for dinner in a closet. And right now, she is looking at $200,000 in cash, and nobody is watching, and nobody would ever know. You hear me? Nobody, ever. No, except she would know. Loretta zipped the bag closed. She slid it back between the mattress and the box spring, exactly where it had been. Same angle, same depth, same position relative to the bed frame. She smoothed the mattress. She tucked the fitted sheet with hospital corners. She made the bed. She cleaned the bathroom. She replaced the towels. She emptied the trash, 1 tissue, 1 bottle cap. She wiped the nightstand. She vacuumed. She checked the minibar. She logged the room on her clipboard. 8-4 deep clean, completed 3:42 a.m. She pushed the cart out of room 814 and closed the door behind her. She didn't report it. She didn't call security. She didn't tell Rosa. She didn't text Vivian. She pushed the cart to the next room and kept working, and her hands didn't shake, and her breathing didn't change. And if you had watched her from the hallway, you would have seen nothing. Just a woman in a Navy uniform doing her job. What Loretta Jean Caldwell did not know, what she could not have known, what would have changed everything if she had, was that she was not alone in room 814. The door between room 814 and room 816 was not a standard hotel connecting door. It was a concealed panel, flush with the wall, covered in the same damask wallpaper as the rest of the suite. From the 814 side, it was invisible. No handle, no seam, no hinge visible to the naked eye. From the 816 side, it opened with a magnetic latch controlled by a keycard that only 2 people in the world possessed. Seok Jin Han, known in the corridors of the Han family's Games Manhattan operation as Ash, was standing behind that door. He had arrived in room 816 at 1:50 a.m. The cash drop in 814 was scheduled for pickup the following afternoon, $200,000 in laundered revenue from the Han family's gambling operations in Flushing, banded and bagged for transfer to a shell company safe deposit box at a Chase branch in Midtown. Seok Jin had come to verify the count himself. He did this occasionally, not because he didn't trust the couriers, but because trust was a luxury his uncle had taught him never to afford. He'd been about to enter 814 through the connecting door when he heard the knock. 2 knocks. A pause. 2 more. He recognized the pattern. Housekeeping. He stepped back. He pressed his eye to the hairline gap where the concealed panel met the door frame, and he watched. He watched Loretta enter with the cart. He watched her assess the room with a single sweep of her eyes, efficient, clinical, practiced. He watched her strip the bed. He watched her fingers find the bag. His body went still. The kind of still that men in his world only achieved when the next 3 seconds could mean everything. His hand was already moving toward his coat, the inside pocket, where a phone could summon 3 men to the hotel in under 4 minutes. But he stopped because he watched her open the zipper 3 inches. He watched her eyes count the stacks. He watched the recognition move across her face, not greed, not panic, not calculation. Something else. Something he had no word for, because he had never seen it in a human being standing 2 feet from $250,000 in untraceable cash. She zipped it closed. She put it back. She made the bed. Mark my words, K-fam, he stood behind that door for the entire time she cleaned that room. 25 minutes. He didn't move. He barely breathed. He watched a woman who made less money in a year than was sitting in that bag, and she folded it closed like it was someone else's laundry. Like it was none of her business. Like the only thing that mattered was that the hospital corners were tight. Seok Jin Han had spent 22 years in the Han family's organization. He had watched men kill for less than what was in that bag. He had watched men betray their own blood for a fraction of it. He had watched loyalty dissolve like sugar in water the moment the numbers got large enough. His entire professional existence was built on the foundational assumption that every human being had a price, and the only question was whether you could afford it. Loretta Jean Caldwell had just told him, without knowing he existed, without saying a single word, that the assumption was wrong. She pushed the cart out. The door clicked shut. Seok-jin stood in room 816. The bathroom light behind him cast his shadow long across the carpet. The serpent tattoo on his neck caught the light. The snake's head just below his right ear, mouth open, fangs visible, the ink so dark it looked alive against his skin. He didn't move for a very long time. He looked at the concealed door. He looked at his own hands. The left one with the circular scar from his uncle's loyalty test, the cigarette burn that had sealed his place in the family when he was 19 years old. He had held that cigarette for 30 seconds without flinching, and his uncle had called it proof. Proof of what? Seok-jin had never asked. He'd assumed it meant loyalty, or strength, or obedience. Standing in room 816, watching the space where a stranger had just chosen honesty over $200,000, he understood for the first time that what he'd proven at 19 was none of those things. He'd proven he was willing to burn for someone else's approval. She hadn't even known anyone was watching. Seok-jin pulled out his phone. He didn't call anyone. He opened the hotel's guest services portal, the one Derek Sullivan had given him admin access to 3 years ago as part of their arrangement, and navigated to the staff directory. Overnight housekeeping, 8th floor. One name, Caldwell Loretta J. He stared at the name. Then he closed the phone, put it in his pocket, and left room 816 through the service corridor without turning on the lights. At 6:47 a.m., Loretta finished her shift. She pushed the cart to the supply closet, locked it, clocked out at the staff terminal in the basement, and walked to the elevator. The morning shift was arriving. She could hear the lobby waking up, the front desk phones, the espresso machine, the concierge greeting an early guest. Vivian was waiting at the service entrance, pulling on her uniform over a bright yellow tank top, her curly hair still damp from the shower. "Lottie! You look like hell." "I always look like hell at 7 a.m., Viv." "No, you look like something happened hell. Not tired hell. Something hell." Loretta adjusted the broken zipper tote bag on her shoulder. Inside it, a change of socks, the paperback novel she hadn't opened tonight, and the granola bar wrapper she'd forgotten to throw out. Nothing happened. Vivian studied her for 3 seconds. Vivian had a talent for reading faces that bordered on the supernatural. She could tell when a guest was about to complain before the guest knew it themselves, and she could tell when Loretta was lying the way a dog could tell when rain was coming. Don't me, I will you until you tell me the truth. That's my constitutional right as your best friend." Loretta almost smiled. "Almost. I'm fine. I just need sleep. You need food, and a man, and a vacation, and a raise." "But sure, sleep." Loretta walked out through the service entrance into the gray Manhattan morning. The sun hadn't broken through yet. The sidewalk was wet from the street cleaner. She pulled her jacket tighter, a thin denim thing she'd had since college, not warm enough for October, but the only jacket she owned that didn't have bleach stains. She walked 6 blocks to the subway. She swiped her Metro card, $2.90 she could feel, and waited on the platform for the A train. The station smelled like hot metal and old coffee. Her phone was in her pocket. Her mother's text was still there, glowing when she pulled it out. "Don't worry about it. $3,200. $200,000. The numbers sat next to each other in her head, and she pushed them apart because she didn't have $3,200, and she would never touch $200,000, and the distance between what she needed and what she'd found was the kind of math that could break a person if they let it. She didn't let it. The A train came. She got on. She sat in the last seat of the last car, put her head against the window, and closed her eyes. In a Tribeca penthouse 14 miles south, Seok-jin Han poured himself a glass of Hibiki 21. The Japanese whiskey his uncle called a weakness, and he called the only honest thing in his apartment, and sat at the window overlooking the Hudson River. He opened his phone again. Staff directory, Caldwell, Loretta J. Emergency contact, Caldwell, Ruth A. Mother, Savannah, Georgia. He navigated to the hotel's internal incident log. No reports filed from the 8th floor overnight. No security alerts. No flags on room 814. She hadn't told anyone. He closed the phone. He took a long drink. The whiskey burned the way good whiskey was supposed to, slow, warm, clarifying. The serpent on his neck seemed to tighten. He sat there until the sun came up, watching the river turn from black to silver, thinking about a woman in a Navy uniform who had been handed a way out of everything and had chosen to stay exactly where she was. The employee file was thinner than he expected, 2 pages. Loretta Jean Caldwell, hired March 14, 4 years and 7 months ago. Emergency contact, Ruth A. Caldwell, Savannah, Georgia. Marital status, divorced. Education, some college, no degree. Performance reviews, exemplary, 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 exemplary. 4 years of exemplary and stills on the graveyard shift making $17 an hour. Seok Jin read the file at 4 a.m. in his Tribeca penthouse, sitting in the Eames chair by the window, a glass of Hibiki 21 balanced on the armrest. The Hudson was black outside. The ice in his glass had stopped melting. He closed the file on his phone. He opened it again. He read the address. Washington Heights, 4th floor. He closed the phone and set it on the side table next to a volume of Yoon Dong-ju, the Korean poet who wrote about stars and counting them and died in a Japanese prison at 27. Seok Jin had been reading the same poem for 3 weeks, the one about shame, the one that ended with the wind stirring in the leaves. He hadn't been able to finish it, and he didn't know why, and he didn't know why not knowing bothered him. He picked up the glass. The whiskey sat on his tongue like an old question. He swallowed. Listen, K-fam, I need to tell you something about rich men who can't sleep at 4 a.m. I do nails for them. Well, not for them, but for their wives, their girlfriends, their mistresses, their daughters. I've been in their penthouses. I've sat in their kitchens while the hibiki was out on the counter. And I have never, not once, seen a man like this read a woman's employee file like it was a love letter. Stay with me, because he doesn't even know what's happening to him yet. 2 days later, Seok Jin booked room 814 for Tuesday night. The room was already permanently held under Pinnacle East Holdings, the shell company. But the internal system tracked individual reservations within the block. He logged an entry for Tuesday 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. under his own cover name, James Park Consultant. Then he pulled up the housekeeping rotation. Tuesday overnight, 8th floor, Caldwell, L. He arrived at the Langham at 11:20 p.m. through the parking garage entrance. Derek Sullivan was waiting for him in the service corridor, the same corridor the staff used, the one that smelled like laundry steam and industrial carpet cleaner instead of bergamot and white tea. Mr. Hahn! Derek's voice dropped to a whisper even though the corridor was empty. Everything's ready in 814. Minibar restocked new linens, supplementary items in the usual location. I'm not picking up tonight. Derek blinked. Sir, leave the room as it is. I want it cleaned on the regular rotation. Overnight shift. Standard procedure. Derek's pale blue eyes moved behind his reading glasses. He was calculating, not the math of the request, but the math of the risk, the math of what it meant when a man who usually came for the cash stayed for the cleaning. Of course, standard procedure. Is there anything? No. Seok Jin walked past him. Derek Sullivan stood in the corridor, watching the back of the charcoal overcoat disappear around the corner, and felt the specific kind of unease that comes from realizing you are a small piece in a game you don't understand. In room 814, Seok Jin didn't turn on the overhead lights. He turned on the bathroom light and left the door open, a wedge of warm light falling across the carpet like a compass needle pointing nowhere. He sat in the armchair by the window. He pulled the book from his coat pocket, the Yoon Dong-ju collection, the same battered paperback he'd been carrying for 3 weeks, and set it on the nightstand. Then he left through room 816. He used the concealed connecting door, the magnetic latch silent as a held breath. He walked out through the service corridor, took the parking garage elevator, drove back to Tribeca. The book stayed on the nightstand. At 3:08 a.m., Loretta entered room 814. She knocked twice, waited. Knocked again. Silence. Keycard. Green light. She pushed the card in. The bed was unmade. One pillow displaced. The bathroom light was on, but the room was empty. Someone had been here and left. She noted the vetiver scent again, the same cologne from 2 nights ago, the same guest. She started stripping the bed, and then she saw the book, a small paperback on the nightstand. Dog-eared, spine cracked, pages soft with use. She picked it up. The cover was in Korean, characters she couldn't read, but the interior was bilingual, Korean on the left page, English on the right. Sky, wind, stars, and poetry, Yoon Dong-ju. She opened to a random page. Her eyes landed on a line. Dying away on the breath of every wind, I must suffer. She read it again. She closed the book. She looked at the nightstand. The book had been placed deliberately, centered, facing the bed as if someone had wanted it found by whoever came next. But guests left things in hotel rooms all the time. Chargers, books, earrings, entire laptops. The protocol was to bag it, tag it, and send it to Lost and Found. Loretta put the book in her tote bag. She didn't know why. She had never taken anything from a guest's room, not in 4 years and 7 months, not a pen, not a soap, And she wasn't taking this, she was holding it for safekeeping until the guest came back. She would return it if they asked. That's what she told herself. And part of it was true. Girl, I know that move. You don't take it, you hold it. You put it in your bag where nobody can see it, and you tell yourself it's temporary, and you know it's not, and you don't care, because something about that object is speaking directly to the part of you that nobody else bothers to address. I know that move because I've done it. With a man's jacket. Don't judge me. 3 days later, there was a flower. Loretta entered room 814 at 3:22 a.m. on Friday. The bed was unmade, the bathroom light was on, the room was empty. And on the nightstand, the same spot where the book had been, was a single white camellia in a water glass. Fresh. The petals were still tight, not a single brown edge. Someone had placed it within the last few hours. Loretta stood in front of the nightstand and looked at the flower for a long time. Not because it was beautiful, it was, but that wasn't the point. The point was that someone had bought a white camellia, brought it to a hotel room, placed it in a water glass on a nightstand, and left it for whoever came to clean the room. And the only person who cleaned this room on this shift was her. She left the flower. She cleaned the room. She made the bed. She checked the bathroom. She logged it. She pushed the cart out. At the door, she turned around. She went back. She took the flower. She put it in the tote bag, tucked between the paperback novel and the change of socks, and zipped the broken zipper as far as it would go. The next Tuesday, there was a note. Hotel stationery, Langham letterhead, handwritten in black ink. 5 words. You are not invisible. Loretta read it standing in room 814 at 3:15 a.m. Her hands held the note the way a person holds a match, carefully, aware it could burn. She read it again. She turned it over. Nothing on the back. She threw it in the trash. She finished cleaning the room. She pushed the cart into the hallway, took 4 steps, stopped. She went back into the room. She opened the trash bag. She pulled the note out. She folded it twice and put it in her tote bag, next to the book and the dried camellia she'd pressed between the pages. Listen, K-Fam, a man is leaving poetry books and flowers and anonymous notes that say you are not invisible for a hotel maid who makes $17 an hour. And he's a Mafia boss, the underboss of the Han family, the man with the serpent tattoo. And he doesn't even have the courage to say it to her face. Are you? He's hiding behind hotel stationery. Mark my words, K-Fam, this man is falling, and he doesn't know how to fall because nobody ever taught him how. Meanwhile, something else was moving. Something cold. Junpyo Han had noticed. Junpyo noticed everything about Seokjin the way a vulture notices a limp. He tracked the room 814 log through the same hotel system Derek Sullivan had opened to the family. The reservation pattern was wrong. 814 had always been a cash drop room, used on rotation, 3 or 4 times a month, never on consecutive weeks. But in the last 2 weeks, someone had booked it 3 times on the same days, Tuesdays and Fridays. The bookings were under Seokjin's cover name. Junpyo sat in the back room of the Flushing gambling den, a narrow space behind the mahjong tables that smelled like cigarette smoke and sesame oil, and scrolled through the logs on his phone. His right thumb cracked his knuckle absently. The koi fish tattoo on his neck shifted with each jaw movement as he chewed his gum. He didn't go to Chairman Han, not yet. A suspicion was not a weapon. A suspicion was a seed, and seeds needed time and darkness and patience before they could split the ground open. He pulled up the housekeeping schedule on his phone one more time. Tuesdays and Fridays. Caldwell L. He screenshot it, deleted the screenshot, then screenshot it again. He saved the second one in a locked folder he'd never used before. Then he put the phone face down on the table and cracked his knuckles, one at a time, left to right, the gum snapping between his molars like a metronome, counting down to something he couldn't see yet. He waited. Seokjin didn't wait. He engineered the meeting. On a Tuesday night in late October, he stayed in room 814. He didn't leave through 816. He didn't leave at all. He turned off the overhead lights, turned on the bathroom light, the same warm wedge across the carpet, and sat in the armchair by the window. The charcoal overcoat was still on. The Patek Philippe glowed faintly on his wrist. The serpent tattoo disappeared into the shadow above his collar. He sat there for 90 minutes waiting. At 3:04 a.m., the knock came. 2 knocks, a pause, 2 more. The keycard beeped. The green light blinked. Loretta pushed the cart through the door with her hip, head down, eyes on the clipboard, and then she looked up. He was standing by the window. Not sitting, he'd stood when he heard the knock. Standing, arms at his sides, the bathroom light cutting across his angular face, the serpent tattoo visible on the right side of his neck, the scar on his left palm hidden inside his pocket. Loretta's hand stayed on the cart handle. She didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She stayed in the doorway, 1 foot in the room and 1 foot in the hallway, balanced on the threshold of something she could feel but not name. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have been out by now. I lost track of time." His voice was quiet. Low register. No accent, or rather, an accent so carefully filed down that it existed only in the spacing between words, the way he paused a half beat longer than an American would between a subject and a verb. "I can come back in 20 minutes, Loretta said, professional. Flat. The voice she used for guests. The voice that communicated helpfulness without inviting conversation. The voice that said, "I am here to serve you and nothing else." "No. Please, I'm leaving." He reached for his coat, then realized he was already wearing it. The gesture was so human, so unrehearsed, that it cracked something in the room's atmosphere. He walked toward the door, toward her. He stopped 3 feet away. She could smell the vetiver. She could see the tattoo up close, the serpent scales, each one individually inked, the fangs near his earlobe, the ink so saturated it looked wet even though it was years old. She knew not who he was, but what he was. The tattoo was a language she couldn't read but understood perfectly, the same way she'd understood the money in the duffel bag, the same way she'd understood the permanently booked room, the same way she understood Derek Sullivan's monthly envelopes. She worked in a 5-star hotel in Manhattan. She cleaned rooms for people whose money came from places that didn't have names on tax forms. She wasn't naive. She was observant. "Jin," he said, first name only. He extended his hand. She looked at his hand. She didn't take it, not out of fear, out of protocol. Housekeeping didn't shake hands with guests. That was a rule so deeply internalized it was reflex. "Loretta," she said. She didn't add Caldwell. She didn't add "I'm your housekeeper." She just gave him her name, standing in a doorway at 3 a.m., and it felt like handing him something she couldn't get back. He lowered his hand. He nodded. He looked at the room, the unmade bed, the nightstand where the book and the flower and the note had been on previous nights. She followed his gaze and saw him see the empty nightstand, and she realized in that moment that he knew. He knew she'd taken them. "Why did you put it back?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropping into still water. No context needed, no clarification. She knew what he meant. He knew she knew. Loretta looked at him. For the first time, directly, not the peripheral glance of a housekeeper avoiding eye contact with a guest, not the downward gaze of a woman making herself smaller so the world would leave her alone. She looked at him, brown eyes meeting dark eyes as across 3 feet of hotel carpet. "Because it wasn't mine." He absorbed the sentence the way a body absorbs a blow. The impact first, then the stillness, then the recalibration of everything. His jaw tightened, his eyes stayed on hers. The serpent on his neck didn't move, but somehow seemed to coil tighter. He left the room without another word. He walked past her, close enough that the sleeve of his overcoat brushed the sleeve of her navy uniform. Charcoal wool against hotel-issued polyester, 2 fabrics that had never touched before and were never designed to. The door closed behind him. Loretta stood in the empty room for 10 seconds, 15:30. She could still smell the vetiver. She cleaned the room. She made the bed. She logged it. 8:14, standard clean, completed 3:31 a.m. She pushed the cart into the hallway and kept working. "K-fam, I swear on my life, this man just asked a woman why she gave back $200,000, and her answer was 4 words. 4 words. Because it wasn't mine." And he looked at her like she'd said the most revolutionary thing he'd ever heard. Because to him, she had. He comes from a world where everybody takes everybody, and she didn't. She just didn't. I can't with this man. I genuinely cannot. 2 weeks later, Loretta got a phone call from Savannah. She was in her apartment in Washington Heights, 4th floor, no elevator, 1 window facing the fire escape, blackout curtains drawn. Biscuit was asleep on the radiator. The dried camellia was pressed between pages 42 and 43 of the Yoon Dong-ju book, which sat on her nightstand next to the folded note. Her mother's voice was different, higher, lighter. The voice Ruth Caldwell used when she was trying not to cry from happiness. "Baby!" Something happened. I don't understand it." The hospital called. They said someone paid for the whole program. All 6 months. Physical therapy, twice a week, the specialist, the pool sessions, everything. Prepaid. The woman at the desk said a wire transfer came through this morning from she said a trust or a foundation or something. She couldn't tell me who. She said it was anonymous. Loretta sat on the edge of her bed. Biscuit opened one eye. "How much?" She said the total was $3,200 for the first phase and $4,800 for the extended. They paid both. $8,000, baby. She said it's done. I don't have to pay anything. Loretta's hand was on her knee. She pressed her fingernails into her kneecap. Not hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to confirm she was awake. That's good, Mama. But who would do this? I don't know anyone who. I don't know, Mama. But don't question it. Just go to the appointments. She hung up. She sat on the bed. Biscuits stretched and resettled. The radiator clicked. $8,000. Anonymous wire transfer. From a trust. She knew. She didn't know his last name. She didn't know his title. She didn't know the scope of his world or the depth of his reach. But she knew that the man who had stood in room 814 at 3 a.m. and asked her why she'd put the money back had heard her answer and had responded with $8,000 and no name attached. She picked up the Yoon Dong-ju book. She opened the page with the pressed camellia. She read the poem next to it, the one about a boy counting stars and whispering names into the dark. She closed the book. She pressed her palm flat against the cover. She sat there for a long time, listening to the radiator and the traffic outside, and the sound of something in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. And in the private dining room of the Han family's flagship Korean barbecue restaurant on 32nd Street, something else was being set in motion. Chairman Han Myung-chul sat at the head of a long wooden table, jade ring glinting on his pinky silver hair immaculate, the lacquered cane with the dragon head leaning against the wall behind him. Across from Seok-jin sat Patricia Kwan, cream cashmere coat draped over her chair, South Sea pearls catching the low light, her posture so controlled it was itself a form of communication. She was beautiful, educated, strategic, a Stanford MBA who understood supply chains and shipping corridors and the architecture of power the way an engineer understands load-bearing walls. She smiled at Seok-jin with precision, warm enough to be polite, cool enough to be professional, calibrated enough to say, I know what this is and I'm willing to play. Chairman Han raised his glass of soju. 2 partnerships. Everyone drank. Seok-jin drank. The soju tasted like nothing. He looked at Patricia across the table. He saw intelligence. He saw beauty. He saw a perfectly engineered life being offered to him on a lacquered platter, the merger of families, the Seoul corridor, the expansion that would triple the Han Empire's reach. He felt nothing. Because somewhere in Washington Heights, a woman was sitting on the edge of a bed with a cat on the radiator, pressing her palm against a book of Korean poetry, and she was the only real thing he had touched in 20 years. Jun Pyo found what he needed on a Thursday. He was sitting in the back seat of a black Hyundai Genesis parked outside the Langham at 6:52 a.m., watching the service entrance through tinted windows, chewing mint gum with his jaw working in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The koi fish tattoo on his neck flexed with each chew. The silver chain caught the early morning light. His phone was in his hand, screen angled away from the driver, a kid named Dae-ho who drove for the family and knew better than to look at anything Junpyo didn't want him to see. The service entrance opened, staff coming off the overnight shift. A short woman in a Navy uniform, Guatemalan older, carrying her bag. A maintenance guy in gray coveralls. And then her, Loretta Jean Caldwell, Navy uniform. Canvas tote bag on her shoulder, thin denim jacket. She walked out into the gray Manhattan morning, and even from 40 feet away through a tinted window, Jun Pyo could see what Seok-jin saw. The way she moved, upright, deliberate, carrying herself like someone who had decided long ago that the world didn't get to see her tired. Beautiful, slender, hair pulled back into a low puff, the small gold cross glinting at her collarbone. A black woman, a hotel maid. Jun Pyo smiled. The smile didn't touch his eyes. It never did. It was the kind of smile that arrived on his face the way a blade arrives in a hand, quickly, with purpose, and always before something got cut. He took 3 photos with his phone. He didn't need them for identification. He already had her name, her shift, her employee number from the hotel system. He took them because photos were currency. Photos were proof. Photos were the kind of evidence that made old men in private dining rooms lean back in their chairs and reconsider the loyalties they'd spent decades building. He didn't go to Chairman Han, not yet. The seed needed one more thing, a narrative. Suspicion wasn't enough. Your nephew is watching a hotel maid wasn't a weapon. Your nephew is compromised by someone outside the family. That was a weapon. But the best weapon of all was the one that didn't need Junpyo's fingerprints on it. The best weapon was one that detonated on its own. He drove to the Langham that afternoon, walked through the lobby in his black bomber jacket and combat boots, out of place enough that 2 front desk agents glanced at each other, and asked for Derek Sullivan. Derek came out of his office looking like a man who had been interrupted while doing something he didn't want to explain. reading glasses on the chain, burgundy tie loosened, the class ring catching the fluorescent light. Mr. Han, here, not here, outside. They walked to the loading dock behind the hotel. The concrete smelled like exhaust and old grease. Junpyo leaned against the wall, hands in his bomber jacket pockets, and looked at Derek the way he looked at everyone, like he was measuring the distance between the man's throat and his own right hand. The overnight maid, 8th floor. Caldwell. Derek's face moved through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, dread. What about her? She's been stealing from VIP rooms. What? No, Loretta? She's exemplary. 4 years, not a single complaint, not a single. She's been stealing. Junpyo's voice didn't rise. It dropped. You're going to find evidence. You're going to fire her. Today. Derek's ruddy complexion went a shade paler. His pale blue eyes darted to the loading dock door, to the parking lot, back to Junpyo. He was calculating not whether to comply, because compliance wasn't optional when a Han family enforcer told you to do something, but how to comply in a way that kept his monthly envelopes coming and his name off any record that could become a liability. There would need to be documentation. A report. Surveillance footage. The cameras on the 8th floor have been off for 3 years. You know that. I know that. We both know why. Junpyo cracked his gum. Search her locker. You'll find something. Guest property. Whatever she's been holding. Write it up. Internal theft. Terminated for cause. Done by end of shift today. Listen, K-fam, I need to stop here. I need to stop. Because this man, this chewing gum, koi fish tattoo, smile before he hits you man, is about to destroy a woman's life to get to his cousin. She's not even a person to him. She's a chess piece. She's collateral. And she doesn't even know the game exists, IU. This makes me so angry. Stay with me. It gets worse before it gets better. Derek did what he was told. He always did what he was told. That was the architecture of his entire existence. A 52-year-old man in a 3-piece suit who had spent his career saying yes to anyone who could hurt him and no to anyone who couldn't. At 2:15 p.m. that same day, Loretta was called. She was at home in Washington Heights, asleep. The blackout curtains were drawn. Biscuit was curled behind her knees. The Yoon Dong-ju book was on the nightstand next to the folded note that said, "You are not invisible." The pressed camellia was between pages 42 and 43, a thin brown ghost of white petals. Her phone rang. She answered with her eyes still closed. "Loretta, this is Derek Sullivan. I need you to come in. We have a personnel matter to discuss. My shift doesn't start until 11, Mr. Sullivan. It's not about your shift. Be here by 4, my office." He hung up. Loretta opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling. The ceiling had a water stain in the shape of nothing, just damage, just the slow evidence of a building falling apart one leak at a time. She got up. She fed Biscuit. She showered. She put on the cleanest version of her uniform, the one she hand-washed on Sundays and hung to dry on the shower rod, and took the A train downtown. She arrived at the Langham at 3:48 p.m. She entered through the service entrance. The day shift was still working. Vivian was in the 3rd floor corridor, pushing a cart, and saw Loretta walking past in uniform at the wrong time of day. "Lottie, what are you doing here? Derek called me in?" Vivian's face shifted. The dimples disappeared. The quick smile went flat. "For what? He didn't say." Vivian grabbed Loretta's arm. "Don't go in there alone. I'll come with you." "It's fine, Viv. It is not fine. Nothing about Derek Sullivan calling you in on your off day is fine. Let me. I'll be fine." Loretta squeezed Vivian's hand, gently removed it from her arm, and kept walking. She took the elevator to the administrative floor. She walked down the carpeted hallway, a different carpet than the guest floors, thinner, cheaper, the hotel's way of reminding the staff exactly where they fell in the hierarchy, and knocked on Derek Sullivan's door. "Come in." The office was small and overfurnished, a mahogany desk too large for the room, 2 leather chairs, a framed photo of Derek shaking hands with a former mayor at some fundraiser gala. A window overlooking the loading dock. Derek was behind the desk, reading glasses on, hands folded. The burgundy tie was back in position, tightened. Next to him, standing against the wall, was a hotel security officer, a heavy-set man in a dark suit with an earpiece and a clipboard. Loretta stopped in the doorway. She saw the security officer. She saw Derek's folded hands. She saw the architecture of what was about to happen, and she understood it the way she understood the money in the duffel bag. Instantly, completely, without needing it explained. "Please sit down, sweetheart," she sat. She didn't correct him. She sat in the leather chair that was slightly lower than Derek's chair, intentionally lower, designed to make the person sitting in it feel small, and she folded her hands in her lap, the same way Derek had folded his on the desk, and she waited. We've received a report regarding irregularities in the VIP guest rooms on the 8th floor, specifically guest property that has gone missing from rooms under your supervision. What property? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of the complaint. What I can tell you is that a review of your locker has been conducted. You searched my locker? Standard procedure when a theft allegation is filed. The security team found this. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a clear plastic bag. Inside the bag, the book, the Yundongju poetry collection, dog-eared, spine cracked, pages soft with use. Loretta looked at the book she had taken from room 814 3 weeks ago. The book she had told herself she was holding for safekeeping. The book she read every night before sleep, pressing her palm against its cover like it was a hand pressing back. This item was identified as guest property belonging to a long-term occupant of room 814. Can you explain how it ended up in your personal locker? K-Fam, they're using Heia's book. The book Hei left for her. The book he placed on that nightstand like a love letter without words. They're using it to fire her. I can't. This is the cruelest thing I've ever had to tell you. Stay with me, girl. Don't close the video. Loretta could explain. She could say, a guest left it in the room. I thought it was abandoned. I kept it to return it. She could say, it was on the nightstand, unclaimed, and I made a judgment call. She could say, someone has been leaving things in room 814 for me. A book, a flower, a note, and I took them because they were the only beautiful things that had entered my life in 4 years. She said none of those things, because every one of those explanations led to the same place. A black hotel maid claiming that an unknown guest had been leaving her gifts. Derek Sullivan would nod, write it down, and file it under implausible. The security officer would note it under defensive fabrication, and the story that would circulate through the staff, the story that would follow her to every hotel she applied to in Manhattan, would be she stole from a guest room, got caught, and made up a story about a secret admirer. No, Loretta said. I can't explain. Then I'm afraid we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately. You'll be escorted out. Your final paycheck will be mailed. Loretta stood up. The leather chair wheezed as her weight left it. She looked at Derek Sullivan, at the man who had called her sweetheart for 4 years and never used her name, who had signed off on disabled cameras and monthly envelopes from men with neck tattoos, who was now sitting behind a mahogany desk firing her for a book of Korean poetry. And she felt something move through her body that was not rage and not grief and not defeat. It was clarity. The bone-deep clarity of a woman who has just watched the last pretense of fairness dissolve and is still standing. My name is Loretta, she said. She walked out of the office. The security officer followed her. He followed her down the corridor, into the elevator, through the lobby. The lobby, not the service entrance. Derek had made sure the escort walked her through the lobby. The morning shift was at the front desk. The concierge was greeting a guest. 3 bellhops were standing near the luggage cart. And Vivian Ford was at the end of the corridor, having run up from the 3rd floor when she saw the security feed on the housekeeping monitor. Vivian was crying, not silently, visibly, with her hand over her mouth and her shoulders shaking. She reached for Loretta as Loretta passed. Loretta took her hand, squeezed it, the same gesture from an hour ago, the same gentle firmness, and let go. I'm okay, Viv. She wasn't okay. But she said it the same way she said, I'm fine at 7 a.m. shift changes and don't worry about it to her mother, and nothing happened to everyone who asked. She said it because the alternative of being a black woman falling apart in the lobby of a 5-star hotel while white people watched was a performance she refused to give. She walked out through the revolving door. The security officer stopped at the threshold. His job was done. The Manhattan afternoon was gray, the sky low, the air carrying the first real cold of late October. She was still wearing the uniform, the navy polo with the Langham crest, the black non-slip shoes, the thin gold cross at her collarbone. She walked. She walked 14 blocks. She didn't count them. She walked north on Madison Avenue, then east on 79th, then north again on Lexington, past the bakeries and the dry cleaners and the juice bars and the dog groomers, past the windows of restaurants where people were sitting down to lunches that cost more than her daily wage. She walked until she found a bench. A public bench, metal cold, facing a small park with bare trees. She sat down. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She sat on the bench with her hands on her knees, the tote bag at her feet, the canvas bag with the broken zipper that still held a change of socks, a granola bar wrapper, and now nothing else, because the book was in a plastic evidence bag in Derek Sullivan's desk drawer, and she watched the sun move across the sky. Girl, I've been fired. Not from a hotel, but I've been fired. My ex-husband fired me from our own salon. He said it was restructuring. He was restructuring his life to include 2 other women. So I know what it feels like to walk out of a building carrying nothing and wearing the uniform of a life that just ended. And I know what Loretta did next, because it's what every woman who has ever been thrown away does when she refuses to break. She called her mother. "Hey, Mama! Hey, baby, you sound tired. You working tonight?" "Yeah, tonight. I just wanted to hear your voice." "Well, you hear it. I'm doing my exercises." The therapist says I'm ahead of schedule. Can you believe that? Ahead of schedule. At my age. "That's good, Mama. You sure you're okay?" "I'm sure." She hung up. She sat on the bench for another hour, 2 hours, 3. The sun dropped behind the buildings. The streetlights came on. The temperature fell. She pulled the thin denim jacket around herself and watched the park go dark. At 6:15 p.m., she stood up. She picked up the tote bag. She walked to the subway. She took the A train home. In her apartment, she fed Biscuit. She took off the uniform, folded it, placed it on the chair by the door, the last time she would fold it, and took a shower. She stood under the water for 20 minutes. The water was too hot. She didn't adjust it. She got dressed, clean jeans, a sweatshirt. Her hair was loose. She'd taken out the elastic in the shower and hadn't put it back, and her coils fell around her face in a way she never allowed at work, in a way nobody saw except Biscuit and her own reflection. She opened her laptop. She went to Indeed. She searched Hotel Housekeeping Manhattan. She applied to 4 positions by 6 p.m. The Peninsula, the Pierre, the St. Regis, the Waldorf Astoria. She wrote the same cover letter 4 times, changing the hotel name each time, and she did not mention the Langham, and she did not mention Derek Sullivan, and she did not mention room 814 or the things she'd found there or the things that had been taken from her. She closed the laptop. She sat on the edge of the bed. The nightstand was bare. The Yoon Dong-ju book was gone, confiscated, the pressed camellia inside it gone too. The folded note that said, "You are not invisible," was still in her tote bag. They hadn't found that. She pulled it out, she unfolded it. 5 words in black ink on Langham letterhead. "You are not invisible." She refolded it, she put it under her pillow. She turned off the light. Biscuit jumped onto the bed and curled behind her knees. The radiator clicked. She was not invisible. Someone had told her so. And then the proof of it had been used to destroy her. What Loretta did not know, what was happening 12 miles south while she lay in the dark with a note under her pillow, was that the collision she'd been pulled into was escalating beyond anything a book of poetry could contain. Seok-jin found out at 9:47 p.m. His phone buzzed in the Tribeca penthouse. A text from one of the Langham's night porters, a kid named Sun Ho who worked for the Han family on the side, an extra set of eyes in the building. Overnight, Super on 8 got fired today. The black woman. Sullivan said theft. Security walked her out through the lobby. Seok-jin read the text 3 times. His hand tightened around the phone until the glass screen protector creaked. He set the phone down on the kitchen counter. He picked up the glass of Hibiki 21. He didn't drink. He held it. Through the lobby. They'd walked her through the lobby. He called Derek Sullivan. Derek answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the particular brightness of a man who thinks he's done a good job. "Mr. Han, I was going to call you in the morning. Who told you to fire her?" Silence. 3 seconds. 4. The brightness in Derek's voice collapsed like a building losing its foundation. There was a report. Guest property found in her locker. A book. It was logged as belonging to the occupant of. "Who told you to fire her?" Not a question this time. A statement with a question mark filed off. Derek Sullivan heard the difference. Everyone who worked with Seok-jin Han heard the difference. The moment his voice went from asking to informing you that your answer had already been judged before you gave it. "Jun Pyo came to see me this afternoon," he said. Seok-jin hung up. He stood in the kitchen of his penthouse. The Hudson River was black outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The serpent tattoo on his neck caught the under-cabinet lighting. The scar on his left palm pulsed the way old wounds do when the body remembers the heat. Jun Pyo. His cousin had done this. His cousin had taken the one clean thing in Seok-jin's life and used it as a weapon, not against Loretta, but against him. Loretta was the shrapnel. Loretta was the collateral damage in a war between 2 men with the same last name who wanted the same throne. For the first time in 22 years inside the Han family's organization, Seok-jin Han felt something he had spent his entire adult life suppressing, the urge to burn something down that he had built. And for the first time in the Manhattan operations history, the underboss and the enforcer were on a direct collision course. Not over territory, not over money, not over the Seoul corridor or the shipping merger or the 200 million real estate portfolio. Over a woman who cleaned hotel rooms for $17 an hour and never took a thing that wasn't hers. The gambling den in Flushing sat above a noodle shop on a street that smelled like garlic and exhaust and rain-wet concrete. The entrance was a door between the noodle shop and a cell phone repair store, unmarked, steel, painted the same gray as the building so it disappeared into the facade. Inside, beyond the stairwell and the second steel door with the electronic lock, the den opened into a wide, low-ceilinged room that held 16 mahjong tables, 4 card tables, and enough cigarette smoke to stain the wallpaper yellow. It was 11:38 p.m. when Seok-jin walked in. The room went quiet. Not silent. The tile still clicked, the cigarette still burned, the overhead fan still turned, but the conversation stopped. The dealers looked up, the regulars looked down. The 2 men standing by the back corridor, young, thick-necked, wearing matching black t-shirts and earpieces, straightened their spines and pressed their backs against the wall. Seok-jin nicked through the room without looking at anyone. Charcoal overcoat, black turtleneck. The serpent tattoo visible above the collar, the snake's fangs catching the fluorescent light. His expression was the blank face of a man who had already decided what was about to happen and was simply walking toward it. The back office was a narrow room with no windows, a metal desk, 2 folding chairs, and a security monitor showing 4 camera feeds from the den floor. The room smelled like sesame oil and old paper. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling. Jun Pyo was sitting behind the desk, bomber jacket open, white crewneck t-shirt, the silver chain catching the bulb light. He was chewing gum, mint, the same brand he always chewed, the rhythm of his jaw as steady as a pulse. The koi fish tattoo on his neck flexed with each chew. He had his feet on the desk. His phone was face down beside his boot. He looked up when Seok-jin entered. He smiled, that smile. The one that arrived before the blade. The one that said, "I've been waiting for you, and the fact that you're here means I've already won." Hyung, the Korean honorific for older male relative. He said it the way you say a word you don't mean, slowly, with all the respect scooped out. "Sit down." Seok-jin didn't sit. He stood in the doorway. The bare bulb cast his shadow long across the metal desk, across Jun Pyo's boots, across the space between them. "You went to Sullivan." "I did. You had her fired. I had a thief removed from the hotel." Standard procedure. Jun Pyo cracked his gum. She had guest property in her locker. A book. "Your book, actually." "Funny how that works." "K-fam, I'm watching this man smile about destroying a woman's life, and he's calling it funny. Funny. Like it's a joke. Like Loretta Jean Caldwell is a punchline. This is the kind of man I see in my clients' houses. The cousin, the brother-in-law, the one who chews gum and smiles and breaks things because breaking things is the only skill he has. I want to reach through the screen and Seok-jin took 1 step into the room. Just 1. The distance between them went from 8 feet to 6. The air pressure changed. "You're going to fix it." "No, Hung, I'm not." Jun Pyo took his feet off the desk. He leaned forward. The smile was still there, but the eyes behind it were flat and cold and calculating. "I already told Uncle. Not about her, about you, that you're compromised. That something outside the family has your attention. He wants to see you. Tomorrow night. The restaurant. Private room." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. Seok-jin absorbed them the way he absorbed everything. Without visible reaction, the way he'd absorbed the cigarette burn at 19, the way he'd absorbed 22 years of loyalty to a man who measured love in obedience. He looked at his cousin. He looked at the koi fish tattoo, the smaller, cruder version of the family mark, inked by a street artist in Seoul instead of the master who'd done Seok-jin's serpent. He looked at the silver chain and the combat boots and the gum cracking between teeth that had never been tested. Not really, not the way Seok-jin's had. "You think this gets you Manhattan," Seok-jin said. "I think this gets me what's mine. Nothing here is yours. I built it. You built it for Uncle. And Uncle decides who keeps it." Seok-jin turned and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He didn't raise his voice. He walked through the gambling den the same way he'd walked in, steady, straight, the overcoat moving around him like armor, and out through the steel door and down the stairwell and onto the wet Flushing street. He stood on the sidewalk. The neon sign from the noodle shop lit the left side of his face in red. The right side was in shadow, the serpent tattoo disappearing into darkness. He breathed. Cold air. Garlic. Exhaust. He got in the Mercedes. He drove. Not to Tribeca, not to the Langham. He drove north on the FDR, the city scrolling past the tinted windows. The bridges, the projects, the parks, the old brick buildings giving way to newer brick buildings giving way to the elevated train tracks of Upper Manhattan. He drove to Washington Heights. He had never been to this part of the city. His Manhattan was Tribeca and Midtown and the East Side and the corridors between them, the penthouse, the hotel, the restaurant, the den. His Manhattan was glass and marble and money. Washington Heights was brick and fire escapes and laundromats with hand-painted signs. He parked the Mercedes on a street where it didn't belong, a $170,000 car sitting between a Honda Civic and a delivery van, and looked up at the building. 4th floor. No elevator. He knew the address from her employee file. He knew the apartment number from a property records search he'd run at 5 a.m. 2 weeks ago, sitting in the Eames chair, telling himself he was gathering intelligence when he was really just learning the shape of her life. He climbed the stairs. The stairwell smelled like cooking oil and pine sol and the specific sweetness of somebody's laundry tumbling in a basement dryer. The walls were painted a yellow that had once been cheerful and was now the color of old butter. The handrail wobbled. A child's bicycle was chained to the railing on the 3rd floor landing. 4th floor, apartment 4C. He stood in front of the door. A doormat that said welcome in faded letters. A mezuzah on the doorframe from a previous tenant. The sound of a television from the apartment next door. A late-night talk show. Canned laughter bleeding through the wall. He knocked. 3 knocks, firm, not aggressive, 15 seconds, 20. He heard the chain being moved, the deadbolt turning. The door opened 4 inches, the width of a chain lock still engaged, and Loretta's face appeared in the gap. She was not wearing the Navy uniform. She was wearing gray sweatpants and a faded Howard University t-shirt, maroon, cracked letters, bought at a thrift store on 145th Street 3 years ago. Her hair was loose, not the low puff of the graveyard shift, loose, her natural coils falling around her face and past her shoulders, and it was the first time he'd seen her hair like this, and the sight of it did something to his chest that he was not prepared for. She looked at him through the 4-inch gap. She saw the overcoat. She saw the tattoo. She saw the man who had asked her why she'd put the money back, standing in the hallway of her building at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and she did not look surprised. "I know what you are," she said. "Not I know who you are." What? She had chosen the word deliberately, and it carried everything. The tattoo, the money, the permanently booked room, the disabled cameras, Derek Sullivan's compliance, the entire architecture of power that had brought him to her door and also destroyed her livelihood. "I know what you did," he said. She studied his face through the gap. 4 inches. The chain lock between them. The hallway light, a single buzzing fluorescent, lit the right side of his face and left the left side in shadow, reversing the neon split from the Flushing Street. The serpent tattoo was visible. The scar on his left palm was visible too. He was holding it open, against the doorframe, not as a gesture, but as an unconscious offering of the thing he usually hid. "Why are you here, girl?" I cried, recording this. "I swear on my life, K-fam," I cried. Because he's standing in a hallway that smells like cooking oil and laundry, and she's standing in a doorway in a thrift store t-shirt, and neither of them has any idea what happens next. But they both know that this moment is the one where everything either breaks or begins. And I've been in that doorway. I've been the woman with the chain lock, looking at a man who showed up uninvited, and the only question that matters is, do I let him in? She didn't let him in. She stood in the doorway, and he told her everything. He told her about the money, the $200,000 in the duffel bag. It was laundered revenue from the Hahn family's gambling operations, cleaned through shell companies, banded for deposit into safe deposit boxes across Manhattan. Room 814 was one of 14 hotel suites used as cash drops. The room had been held under Pinnacle East Holdings for 6 years. Derek Sullivan had been on the Hahn family's payroll for 5 of those years. He told her about the connecting door, room 816 to room 814, the concealed panel, the magnetic latch. He told her he'd been standing behind it when she found the money. He told her he watched her open the zipper, count the stacks with her eyes, close the zipper, slide the bag back, and make the bed. He told her about the book, the flower, the note. He told her he'd left them. He told her he didn't know why he'd left them, except that he'd spent 22 years in a world where everything was transactional, and she was the first person he'd encountered who had been offered a transaction. $200,000 for silence. and had refused it without even knowing it was being offered. He told her about his cousin June Pio, the photos, the visit to Derek Sullivan, the fabricated theft charge, the locker search, the book used as evidence. He told her that the book they'd used to fire her was the book he'd left for her, and that the irony of it was so precise it felt designed by something larger than both of them. He told her about his uncle, Chairman Han, the dinner, Patricia Kwan, the arranged bride, the soul corridor, the merger that would triple the empire, the ultimatum, marry Patricia, cut all contact with whatever distraction had entered his life, or be removed from the Manhattan operation. He told her he was standing in her doorway at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday because she was the only real thing he had touched in 20 years. Loretta listened to all of it. She stood in the doorway with the chain lock between them, and she listened without interrupting, without reacting, without performing the emotions that the moment seemed to demand. Her face was still, her brown eyes were steady, her hands were at her sides. When he finished, the hallway was quiet. The talk show next door had ended. The fluorescent light buzzed. "I didn't put the money back for you," she said. "I know," his voice was low, almost inaudible. "That's why I'm here. Because if she had done it for him, if there had been calculation or performance or awareness that someone was watching, it would have been just another transaction. Another exchange in a world made entirely of exchanges. But she hadn't known. She had put the money back because the money wasn't hers, and the simplicity of that, the absolute irreducible simplicity, was the thing that had broken him open. Loretta looked at him for a long time. Then she closed the door. He heard the chain slide. The door opened again, all the way this time, the full width of the frame. She stood in the doorway in her Howard University t-shirt and her gray sweatpants, her hair loose, her feet bare on the cold tile floor. "My cat's name is Biscuit," she said. "He doesn't like strangers." He stepped inside. The apartment was small, a studio, barely 500 square feet, a bed against the wall, a kitchenette with 2 burners, a radiator under the window, blackout curtains closed, an orange tabby cat on the radiator, staring at him with the focused hostility of an animal that has correctly assessed a threat. "Biscuits," Jin said. The cat didn't move. Loretta sat on the edge of the bed. He stood by the door. The distance between them was 10 feet, and it contained everything. His world and her world, the serpent and the cross, the overcoat and the uniform, the 200 million empire, and the studio apartment with the broken zipper tote bag and the cat on the radiator. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He looked around the apartment, at the blackout curtains, at the kitchenette, at the radiator, at the small framed photo on the wall, Loretta and an older woman on a porch, Savannah Light, both of them smiling. He looked at the nightstand where the Yundongju book had been and wasn't anymore. "I'm going to give it back," he said. "Give what back?" "Everything." 3 weeks later, Seok-jin Han sat across from Chairman Han Myung-chul in the private dining room of the Korean barbecue restaurant on 32nd Street. The room was the same as every other time. The long wooden table, the low light, the jade ring, the lacquered cane, the soju. Patricia Kwan was not present. The chairman had dismissed her for this meeting. This was family. "You're refusing the marriage." "Yes." "You're refusing the soul corridor." "Yes." "What are you offering in return?" Seok-jin placed a black leather folder on the table. Inside, the full documentation of the Manhattan operation. Every shell company, every property, every laundered dollar, every account number, every contact, every arrangement, including Derek Sullivan's monthly envelopes, which the chairman had never personally authorized and would be very interested to learn about. "Everything," Seok-jin said. "The entire Manhattan operation, all of it, transferred to whoever you designate." Chairman Han looked at the folder. He didn't open it. He looked at his nephew, at the serpent tattoo, at the sharp jawline, at the composed posture of a man who stood very still and had built a 200 million empire from a Flushing gambling den. "This is betrayal. This is the first honest thing I've done since I was 19. The chairman's hand tightened on the dragon-head cane. His deep-set eyes moved behind the gold-rimmed glasses. He was calculating, not the math of the loss, because the Manhattan operation would continue regardless of who ran it, but the math of precedent. If a nephew could walk away, anyone could walk away. And if anyone could walk away, the cage wasn't real. And if the cage wasn't real, the family wasn't real. If you leave, you don't come back. I know, you lose the name. I know, you lose everything I gave you. You gave me a cigarette burn and called it loyalty." Seok-jin's voice was steady. His left hand was flat on the table, the scar visible, the circular mark from the lit cigarette he'd held for 30 seconds at 19 years old. I'm giving you a 200 million operation and calling it freedom. I think my math is better. Mark my words, K-fam. This man just told the most powerful person in his life, the man who raised him, the man who owns him, that his loyalty was a burned scar and his freedom is worth more than $200 million. And he said it with his hand flat on the table, the hand with the scar. Like he was showing the receipt. Chairman Han didn't speak for a long time. The soju sat untouched. The private dining room was so quiet that Seok Jin could hear the kitchen through the wall. The sizzle of meat on the grill, the clatter of dishes, the sounds of a restaurant that would go on existing long after this conversation ended. Junpyo gets Manhattan, the chairman said. Not a question. Junpyo gets Manhattan. The chairman picked up his soju glass. He drank. He set the glass down with the precise, measured motion of a man who had been controlling his gestures for 68 years. Go, Seokjin stood. He buttoned his overcoat. He walked out of the private dining room, through the restaurant, past the tables of families eating galbi and drinking beer, past the hostess stand, past the front door, and onto 32nd Street. The November air hit his face, cold, clean, free. He drove the Mercedes to a parking garage in Tribeca. He left the keys with the attendant. He walked to his penthouse, packed one suitcase, clothes, the Patek Philippe, a gift from his mother, not the family, and 3 books of Korean poetry, and called a car service. Junpyo got Manhattan. He moved into the Tribeca penthouse within a week. He promoted himself to underboss. He took over the 14 hotel suites, the shell companies, the real estate portfolio, the gambling dens. He got everything he wanted. Within 6 months, the weight of it was already cracking him. The dens had 3 compliance issues. 2 shell companies were flagged by a Treasury Department audit. A courier turned informant. Junpyo chewed his gum faster and smiled less, and the koi fish tattoo on his neck looked smaller every day, the way a borrowed crown always does when the head wearing it is the wrong size. Loretta didn't move to Savannah. She got a call back from the peninsula 2 weeks after the firing. The night manager, a woman named Grace Okonkwo, Nigerian-American, 51, who had worked her way up from housekeeping herself, interviewed Loretta in person, called the Langham for a reference, received a vague and evasive response from Derek Sullivan, called back and asked specifically for Vivian Ford, and got the truth. Grace hired Loretta on the spot, overnight supervisor, $19 an hour, $2 more than the Langham, with overtime approval. Welcome to the peninsula, Loretta. Not sweetheart. Seokjin resurfaced 3 months later in Savannah, Georgia, 3 miles from Ruth Caldwell's house. He rented a small storefront on a quiet street near Forsyth Park, a building with a tin roof and wide windows and a ceiling fan that turned too slowly, and opened a used bookshop. He stocked it with translated poetry, Korean, Japanese, Persian, Chilean, Russian, Polish, Yoon Dongju, Matsuo Basho, Hafez, Neruda, Wisława Szymborska, Anna Akhmatova. He put a sign in the window that said open in English and Yorlim in Korean. He had no serpent tattoo covered. He didn't erase it. He didn't hide it. He stood behind the counter in a plain white button-down shirt with the collar open, the serpent visible, the snake's fangs near his earlobe, the ink as dark as the day it was done. And he let it be what it was, a mark of where he'd been, not where he was going. Loretta visited Savannah once a month. She took the Amtrak from Penn Station, 11 hours, a window seat, the paperback novel she'd finally finished and replaced with another. She stayed with her mother for the weekend. On Saturday afternoons, she walked to the bookshop. She never bought the same poet twice. She'd stand in the aisle, pulling books from the shelf one at a time, reading first lines, putting them back until she found the one that felt like it was written that morning for someone standing in exactly this aisle at exactly this moment. She'd bring the book to the counter. He'd ring it up. Their fingers would touch over the change, his scarred palm against her unblemished one, the place where the cigarette had burned pressing briefly against the place where the gold cross chain fell when she leaned forward. They didn't rush. They had no language for what they were building, and they didn't need one. It was slower than love, quieter than rescue. It had no contract, no transaction, no shell company name attached to it. It was built on the only foundation that had ever held. The night a woman found $200,000 that wasn't hers and put it back, and the night a man watched her do it and understood, for the first time, what freedom looked like. K-fam, I'm done. I'm done and I'm not okay, because this isn't a fairy tale. He didn't carry her off in a Mercedes. She didn't move into a penthouse. She's still working overnight shifts. He's selling used poetry books in a tin roof shop in Savannah. And once a month, their hands touch over pocket change, and that's the whole love story. That's IT. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever told you. Mark my words, Kefam, the richest man in the room isn't the one with the money. It's the one who gave it all back to stand behind a counter and wait for her. Ruth Caldwell's physical therapy was completed ahead of schedule. She walked without a limp by spring. On Saturdays, she baked sweet potato pie and brought a slice to the bookshop, and the man behind the counter, the quiet Korean man with the tattoo on his neck and the scar on his palm, thanked her in English and then in Korean, and Ruth Caldwell, who had never left Georgia except to visit her daughter in New York, learned the Korean word for thank you and used it every time. 감사합니다. The word hung in the air of the bookshop like a bell still ringing after the clapper has stopped. Thank you for the pie, for the visit, for the daughter who put the money back. On a Saturday afternoon in April, Loretta stood in the poetry aisle. She pulled a book of Yoon Dong-ju from the shelf, a new edition, different from the one that had been confiscated, with a blue cover instead of the original's worn gray. She opened to the poem about counting stars. She read the last line, the one about the wind stirring in the leaves. The line Seok Jin had never been able to finish. She brought the book to the counter. He rang it up. She paid an exact change, $4.75, coins counted out one at a time. He looked at her across the counter. She looked at him. Brown eyes meeting dark eyes across 3 feet of pine countertop, the way they'd met across 3 feet of hotel carpet in room 814 at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. I finished the poem, she said. I know, he said. I heard you turn the page. She picked up the book. She walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned back. Same time next month? Same time. She left. The door closed. The ceiling fan turned. The tin roof ticked in the April heat. Seok Jin stood behind the counter in a bookshop in Savannah, Georgia, with the serpent tattoo on his neck and the scar on his palm and the ghost of her voice still in the room. And he felt, for the first time in his life, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The wind stirred in the leaves. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever given back something that could have saved you? Because keeping it would have cost you who you are. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, redemption, and love that asks for nothing, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.